Blood was pooling on the pristine white tiles of the executive washroom, and the most powerful man in the city was currently bleeding out in my arms, pressing a trembling, desperate finger to his lips. If you love thrilling boy love stories packed with intense suspense, unexpected alpha/omega dynamics, and heart-pounding romance, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell us in the comments what you think will happen next. Your support helps bring more of these stories to life. Now, let's dive straight into the mystery. Part 1. The Scent of Blood and Rain. The world is a loud, unforgiving place when you are an Omega, but it becomes entirely deafening when you are an Omega raising a child completely on your own. My name is Liam. For the past 4 years, my entire universe has revolved around two things: keeping my 4-year-old son, Noah, safe and remaining completely invisible to the rest of the world. In a society ruled by aggressive alphas and demanding corporate hierarchies, a single Omega with no family backing is nothing but a target. To survive, I had learned to erase myself. I wore baggy, gray uniforms. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the floor. And most importantly, I took a daily, heavy dose of over-the-counter scent blockers to completely suppress the soft, sweet scent of vanilla and chamomile that marked my secondary gender. By all appearances, I was just another faceless, scentless beta working the graveyard shift as a janitor at Sterling Enterprises. Sterling Enterprises was a colossal glass and steel monolith that pierced the night sky of the city, a global conglomerate dealing in advanced tech and defense contracts. Working the night shift was exhausting, draining the life from my bones, but it paid well enough to keep a roof over Noah's head and fresh food on our small kitchen table. I preferred the quiet of the midnight hours. From midnight to 6 in the morning, the towering building was a ghost town, devoid of the arrogant executives and aggressive alpha energies that usually choked the daytime air. Or at least it was supposed to be. It was exactly 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was on the 50th floor, the executive suite, running a microfiber cloth over the polished mahogany of a conference table. The only sound was the soft hum of the central air conditioning and the rhythmic swish of my own movements. I was thinking about Noah, wondering if the babysitter had remembered to leave the night light on in the hallway, when a heavy, muffled crash shattered the silence. I froze. The rag slipped from my trembling fingers, landing silently on the carpet. The sound had come from down the hallway, near the private executive washrooms. My initial instinct, the deeply ingrained survival instinct of an unbonded Omega, screamed at me to run toward the service elevators, to clock out and disappear into the night. But before I could take a single step in the opposite direction, something else hit me. A scent. Despite my heavy blockers, the smell was so potent, so overwhelmingly thick, that it punched straight through my defenses. It was the rich, intoxicating scent of petrichor, the smell of rain on dry earth, mixed with the sharp, crackling ozone of a thunderstorm. It was an alpha's pheromones, but they weren't commanding or arrogant. They were laced with the sharp, acidic tang of pure distress and iron. Copper. Blood. Before my brain could rationalize the danger, my feet were already moving. The nurturing instinct of an Omega is a dangerous, uncontrollable thing when triggered by someone in genuine agony. I moved silently down the dimly lit hallway, my rubber-soled shoes making no sound against the thick carpeting. I peeked around the corner into the expansive, marble-lined executive washroom. The sight that greeted me made my breath catch in my throat. A man was slumped against the far wall, his breathing ragged and shallow. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire year's salary, but the immaculate fabric was ruined. A dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly across his side, pooling onto the pristine white marble beneath him. Even in the dim security lighting, I recognized him instantly. Everyone in the city knew that face. Ethan Sterling, the billionaire CEO of Sterling Enterprises. A pureblood alpha known for his ruthless business tactics, his striking, cold features, and his absolute intolerance for failure. He was a man who commanded rooms without speaking a word, a titan who held the city's economy in the palm of his hand. And right now, he was dying on a bathroom floor. I rushed forward, dropping to my knees beside him. "Mr. Sterling," I whispered frantically, my hands hovering over him, unsure of where to touch without causing more pain. His head snapped up. His eyes, usually a piercing, icy blue, were clouded with pain and feverish intensity. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a split second, I saw the raw, unfiltered vulnerability of a wounded predator. His breathing was a harsh, wet rattle. He reached out with a blood-soaked hand, grabbing the collar of my uniform with surprising, terrifying strength. He pulled me down, his face inches from mine. The scent of thunderstorm and blood wrapped around me, dizzying and overwhelming. I expected him to demand a doctor, to order me to call for an ambulance. Instead, his eyes widened with sudden, sheer terror as he looked past me, toward the hallway. He pressed a trembling, blood-stained finger to his own lips. Blood was pooling on the pristine white tiles of the executive washroom, and the most powerful man in the city was currently bleeding out in my arms, pressing a trembling, desperate finger to his lips. "Don't," he breathed, his voice barely a rasp against the quiet hum of the building. "Don't talk. Not a sound." I stared at him, bewildered. "Sir, you're bleeding out. I need to call the authorities." "No," he hissed, the effort causing him to cough weakly, a thin line of blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. His grip on my shirt tightened. They breached the security feed. They're still here. If you make a sound, they will kill us both." A chill, colder than ice, washed down my spine. They. Who was they? Assassins? Corporate spies? Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of the elevator dinging echoed down the corridor. It was faint, but in the dead of the night, it sounded like an explosion, followed by the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots stepping off onto the 50th floor. Not the frantic, rushed steps of security guards rushing to aid their boss, but the slow, methodical pacing of hunters looking for their prey. "Check the outer offices," a deep, mechanical voice ordered from down the hall. He caught a bullet to the liver. He couldn't have gone far. "Find the drive and finish him." Panic seized my chest, squeezing my lungs until I couldn't breathe. I thought of my little Noah, sleeping peacefully in his bed. If I died here, tonight, what would happen to him? He would be thrown into the foster system, an innocent child left to the mercy of a cruel world. I couldn't die here. But I couldn't leave this man to be slaughtered, either. Survival mode kicked in. The janitorial supply closet was directly across the hall. It was small, cramped, and smelled heavily of industrial bleach and floor wax. "Can you stand?" I whispered into Ethan's ear, my lips brushing against his jaw. He shivered, whether from the pain or the proximity, I didn't know. "Barely," he choked out. "You have to," I commanded, my voice firmer than it had been in years. I slung his heavy, muscular arm over my shoulder and wrapped my arm around his waist, careful to avoid the gunshot wound. He was massive, a solid wall of alpha muscle, and his dead weight nearly crushed me. But adrenaline is a miraculous thing. Gritting my teeth, I hoisted him up. He groaned softly, a sound of pure agony, but bit his lip to keep from crying out. Together, we stumbled across the hallway. Every step felt like walking through molasses. The heavy footsteps down the hall were getting closer. Doors were being kicked open, files being thrown. I practically shoved Ethan into the dark supply closet, squeezing in right behind him and pulling the heavy wooden door shut just as a shadow fell across the frosted glass of the hallway partition. We were plunged into absolute, pitch-black darkness. The closet was barely large enough for my cleaning cart, let alone two grown men. I was pressed flush against Ethan's chest. The heat radiating off his body was immense, feverish. His head dropped onto my shoulder, his ragged breaths ghosting over the sensitive skin of my neck. I realized with a jolt of horror that we had left a trail. The blood on the bathroom floor. It was too late to go back. The heavy footsteps were right outside the door now. Through the small louvers in the closet door, I saw the beam of a high-powered flashlight sweep across the hallway. "Blood," a gruff voice noted. He went into the washroom. Ethan tensed against me. His hand, still slick with his own blood, found my waist in the dark, gripping me tightly. It was an instinctual alpha gesture, protecting what was close to them when cornered. Even dying, his instincts were fighting to take control. But his scent was spiking. The distress pheromones were becoming sharper, louder. Alphas couldn't control their scent when severely traumatized, and if the men outside were alphas or even sensitive betas, they would smell him through the wooden door. I had to do something. Without thinking, I reached into my uniform pocket and pulled out the small, travel-sized bottle of pure, undiluted bleach I used for stubborn stains. I twisted the cap off and quietly poured the harsh liquid directly onto the floor of the closet, splashing some on my own shoes. The acrid, burning chemical smell instantly flooded the tiny space, stinging my eyes and burning the back of my throat. It was nauseating, but it served its purpose. It violently masked the scent of rain, blood, and alpha distress. I pressed both of my hands firmly against Ethan's chest, right over his racing heart, willing him to stay quiet. I leaned in, putting my mouth right against his ear, so close I could feel the stubble on his jaw. "Don't talk," I breathed, returning his earlier command. "Don't even breathe." Outside, the door to the washroom was kicked open. "Boss," a voice echoed from just a few feet away. "There's blood in here. Someone tried to wipe it up, but they did a rushed job. And I smell bleach. Fresh bleach." My heart stopped. "Check the closets," the mechanical voice replied. "Tear the whole floor apart. He doesn't leave this building alive." The beam of a flashlight cut through the louvers of our door, striping Ethan's pale, sweat-drenched face in harsh white light. The handle to the supply closet slowly began to turn. End of Part 1. Part 2, the Sterling Drive. The brass handle of the supply closet turned with an agonizingly slow, metallic squeak. Every single muscle in my body locked into place. I stopped breathing. I stopped blinking. I could feel the erratic, terrifyingly weak beat of Ethan Sterling's heart thudding against my own chest as I held him up in the cramped darkness. My right hand, slick with his blood, gripped a heavy, industrial-grade steel wrench I had blindly grabbed from my cleaning cart. It was a pathetic weapon against armed mercenaries, but if that door opened, I was not going to die on my knees. I had to make it back to Noah. The door opened a fraction of an inch. A sliver of harsh white light cut into the darkness, landing directly on Ethan's pale, sweat-slicked cheek. Suddenly, a violent burst of static erupted from the hallway, followed by a frantic voice over a tactical radio. "Command, we have movement in the south stairwell. Floor 48. It's a decoy, but it triggered the motion sensors. The local PD just got a tip-off too. Sirens are 2 minutes out." The sliver of light vanished instantly as the heavy closet door was shoved closed. "Damn it," the gruff voice outside hissed. "Leave the janitor's mess. He's trying to make a run for the parking garage. Move. We have 90 seconds before this place is swarming with cops." The heavy thud of tactical boots echoed rapidly down the corridor, fading into the distance as the men sprinted toward the emergency exit. Silence descended upon the 50th floor once more, heavy and suffocating. For 10 agonizing seconds, neither Ethan nor I moved. Then, the adrenaline that had been keeping the billionaire alpha on his feet suddenly evaporated. His massive frame went entirely slack, all his dead weight collapsing against me. "Mr. Sterling," I hissed, dropping the wrench and scrambling to catch him before he hit the floor. The confined space worked to our advantage. I used the wall and my cleaning cart to guide him down as gently as possible, ending up kneeling on the harsh linoleum right between his splayed legs. In the pitch black, I had to rely entirely on touch and sound. His breathing was terribly shallow, a wet, rattling sound that terrified me. The sharp, metallic scent of his blood was fighting a losing battle against the overwhelming stench of the bleach I had poured everywhere. But underneath it all, I could still sense that faint, distressed petrichor, the scent of a dying storm. "Flashlight," I muttered to myself, patting down my uniform. I pulled out my small penlight and clicked it on, shielding the beam with my hand so it wouldn't shine through the door's louvers. The dim circle of light illuminated a gruesome scene. Ethan's bespoke charcoal jacket was ruined, but it was his white button-down shirt that made my stomach churn. The left side of his waist was completely saturated in a dark, glossy crimson. Okay, I whispered, panic finally beginning to fray the edges of my forced calm. "I need to stop the bleeding." I reached up to my cart, blindly tearing open a fresh, sterile package of heavy-duty microfiber cloths used for polishing glass. I folded 3 of them into a thick square. "This is going to hurt," I warned him softly. Ethan's head rolled against the wall. His eyes fluttered open, finding mine in the weak light of the penlight. Even clouded with pain, the sheer intensity of his icy blue gaze was staggering. I pressed the makeshift bandage hard against his side. Ethan violently inhaled, a strangled, guttural sound of pure agony tearing from his throat. His entire body arched off the floor. His large, blood-stained hand shot out, wrapping around my wrist with a grip like a steel vise. He was bleeding out, yet his alpha strength was still terrifying. "Shoo, I know. I hushed him, forcing my voice into a soothing low register, a maternal, omega tone I usually reserved for when Noah woke up from a nightmare. "You have to stay still. I have to keep the pressure on." He didn't let go of my wrist. Instead, he pulled me slightly closer, his chest heaving. His nose twitched, burying slightly into the collar of my uniform. I froze. The exertion, the sheer, primal terror of the situation, and the heavy sweat dampening my skin were washing away my scent blockers. The bleach was strong, but we were inches apart in a sealed box. I knew what was happening. My natural scent, the soft, sweet aroma of warm vanilla and chamomile, was leaking through. Ethan's eyes widened, the pain momentarily eclipsed by profound confusion. The harsh, aggressive edge of his alpha pheromones visibly softened, curling around my own scent in an instinctual attempt to seek comfort. His voice was barely a rasp. You're an Omega. I'm a janitor trying to keep you from bleeding to death. I deflected sharply, pressing harder on the wound. Keep your voice down. No unbonded Omega. Works the night shift. In this sector, he panted, his brow furrowing. He looked at my face, really studying it. The baggy uniform, the lack of a mating bite on my neck, the fierce, unyielding look in my eyes. Why? Because rent is expensive and childcare is a nightmare. I replied dryly, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Now is really not the time for a performance review, Mr. Sterling. A faint, breathless sound escaped his lips. It took me a second to realize it was a chuckle, immediately followed by a wince of pain. His hand slid down from my wrist, fumbling weakly toward the inner pocket of his ruined suit jacket. His fingers emerged holding a small, matte black rectangular device. A heavy-duty, encrypted flash drive. It was smeared with his blood. He pressed it against my chest, right over my heart. Take it, he whispered, his voice losing its strength. The men outside, they are Blackwood operatives. Corporate mercenaries. They want the defense schematics on this drive. If they get it, millions of lives are at risk. I stared at the little piece of metal, feeling a cold dread settle in my stomach. I don't want your corporate secrets, Mr. Sterling. I want to go home to my son. At the mention of a child, Ethan's eyes softened entirely. A deep, instinctual rumble vibrated in his chest. An alpha's involuntary response to the mention of a pup. A son. You're a mother. A father, I corrected quietly. And he's waiting for me. So you are not dying tonight. Do you hear me? I am not explaining to the police why there's a dead billionaire in my supply closet. Liam, he breathed. I hadn't told him my name. He must have read my faded name tag. You need to run. Take the drive. Give it to the police. Leave me here. I'm not leaving you, I said fiercely, the Omega instinct to protect the wounded flaring up with a vengeance. I couldn't just walk away and let him die. Noah would never forgive me if he knew I let someone die when I could have helped. How do we get out of here? Ethan closed his eyes, fighting to stay conscious. My office down the hall. Behind the bookshelf, private elevator. Drops straight to the underground garage, my personal car. Is the elevator secure? Requires my biometric scan, he gasped, his skin growing paler by the second. Retina and handprint. You can't use it without me. Then you're getting up, I told him, my voice leaving no room for argument. I shoved the encrypted drive deep into my pants pocket. I grabbed a roll of heavy-duty packing tape from my cart, quickly and tightly wrapping it around his waist, and over the microfiber cloths to hold the makeshift bandage in place. It was crude, and it would hurt like hell, but it would keep him from bleeding out in the hallway. Police sirens, Ethan murmured, his head tilting toward the door. I strained my ears. Faintly, through the thick, soundproofed glass of the building, I could hear the wail of sirens echoing up from the city streets 50 floors below. The mercenaries had heard them too. They would be rushing, desperate. If they realized the stairwell alarm was a decoy, they would come right back here to finish the job before the cops breached the building. We have to move. Now, I said. I hauled him to his feet. He was heavier this time, his body actively shutting down. I draped his arm over my shoulder, holding him tightly by the waist. I slowly turned the knob of the closet door and pushed it open an inch. The hallway was empty. The lights were still dim to their midnight setting. 3 doors down, Ethan breathed into my ear. We stepped out of the closet. The silence was deafening. Every step we took felt like a gunshot echoing through the corridor. I dragged him past the open door of the washroom where this had all started, avoiding the smear of his blood on the marble floor. We reached the heavy, frosted glass double doors of the CEO's office. Panel, on the right, Ethan muttered. I shifted his weight, allowing him to lift his trembling right hand. He pressed his palm against a sleek, hidden glass panel on the wall. A blue laser swept over his skin, beeping softly. Access granted. The heavy doors clicked unlocked. I shoved them open, dragging him into the massive, opulent office just as a shout echoed from the far end of the hallway. The blood trail stops at the closet. He's still on this floor. My blood ran cold. They were back. I kicked the office doors shut, locking the deadbolt. It wouldn't hold them for long. They had explosives. I had seen the tactical gear they were carrying. Bookshelf, Ethan wheezed, pointing to the massive, floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelf lining the back wall. Third row, Shakespeare. I practically carried him across the plush carpet. The office was sprawling, offering no immediate cover. I slammed into the bookshelf, scanning the titles frantically in the dark. Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear. I grabbed the thick spine of King Lear and pulled. It clicked, tilting forward. The entire section of the bookshelf hissed, sliding smoothly to the left, revealing a sleek, steel elevator door. A panel on the wall lit up, waiting for a retinal scan. "Hold me up," Ethan commanded, his voice tight with pain. I propped him up, tilting his head toward the scanner. A red light washed over his eye. Identity confirmed. "Welcome, Mr. Sterling." The steel doors slid silently open. Just as they did, a deafening explosion shattered the quiet of the office. The frosted glass doors at the entrance blew inward, raining sharp shards of glass across the expensive carpet. Smoke poured into the room, followed immediately by the harsh beams of tactical flashlights and the red dots of laser sights sweeping the darkness. "There, by the wall. Get in," I screamed, shoving Ethan into the elevator car and throwing myself in right behind him. A volley of silenced gunshots spat through the air. One of the bullets whizzed past my ear, so close I felt the heat of it, before burying itself into the steel wall of the elevator. I slapped the glowing G button on the panel. The doors slid shut, sealing with a heavy, final clunk just as 3 men carrying assault rifles breached the inner office, their angry shouts muffled by the reinforced steel. The elevator instantly dropped, the sudden momentum sending my stomach into my throat. We were safe. For now. I slid down the wall of the elevator, my knees pulling into my chest as I gasped for air, trembling violently. I looked over at Ethan. The Alpha CEO was slumped in the corner of the polished metal box, his head thrown back, his eyes closed. He was breathing, but just barely. We were heading to the underground garage, but I knew with absolute certainty that this nightmare was far from over. End of Part 2. Part 3. The Descent. The private elevator plunged down the shaft of the Sterling Enterprises building with a terrifying, stomach-churning velocity. Inside the polished steel box, the only sound was the desperate, ragged breathing of Ethan Sterling and the frantic pounding of my own heart. The adrenaline that had propelled me to haul a billionaire out of a war zone was rapidly beginning to curdle into sheer, unadulterated panic. My hands, stained dark red with his blood, were shaking so violently I had to press them flat against my thighs to keep from losing my mind. I looked over at the man slumped against the mirrored wall. The pristine, intimidating aura of the city's most feared alpha was completely gone, replaced by the grim reality of a man bleeding out in a bespoke suit. His head was tilted back, his icy blue eyes half closed and unfocused. The heavy packing tape I had wrapped around his torso was already darkening at the edges. "Stay with me," I ordered, my voice trembling but firm. I shuffled across the small space and knelt beside him, gently tapping his pale cheek. "Mr. Sterling." "Ethan, do not close your eyes." "I'm awake," he rasped, though his eyelids fluttered dangerously. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking in the silence. "The car is on sublevel 4. Bay 12. It's an armored Obsidian. License plate begins with 0. "I've never driven an armored car before," I confessed, panic bleeding into my tone. My daily commute consisted of taking the city bus or driving a battered, 10-year-old sedan that rattled if I went over 50 miles an hour. "You're going to have to drive." Ethan let out a weak, breathy sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't ended in a choked cough. "Liam, I can barely feel my legs. If I get behind the wheel, we'll be dead before we hit the exit ramp." He shifted his weight, wincing as he reached into his undamaged trouser pocket. He pulled out a sleek, heavy key fob made of matte black metal and held it out to me. "Take it," he commanded. When I hesitated, his alpha tone, usually suppressed, but now raw and bleeding through his pain, vibrated through the small space. "Take the keys, Liam." I snatched the fob from his hand, the cool metal biting into my palm. Just as my fingers closed around it, the overhead lights in the elevator violently flickered. The smooth, rapid descent suddenly turned into a violent shudder. The brakes screeched, an agonizing sound of metal grinding against metal, and the elevator jerked to a jarring, abrupt halt, throwing me hard against the opposite wall. The lights cut out entirely. We were plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The digital floor indicator above the door blinked a stark, blood-red number, 14. What happened? I gasped, scrambling back to his side and flicking on my small penlight. They tapped into the building's mainframe, Ethan grunted, gripping his bleeding side. His face was a mask of furious concentration. They realized they couldn't breach the elevator shaft, so they cut the main power grid to the sector. They're trying to trap us between floors. Can they open the doors? Not without a blowtorch, and that takes time. But they don't need to, Ethan said grimly. If they have the mainframe, they can drop the car. They can disengage the emergency brakes and let us freefall. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I thought of Noah, fast asleep in his little bed with the dinosaur sheets. I had promised I would take him to the park tomorrow morning after my shift. I had promised. No, I whispered fiercely. The Omega instinct, the deep biological imperative to survive for my pup, roared to life, eclipsing my fear. No, we are not dying in a box. How do we fix it? The panel, Ethan gasped, pointing a shaking finger at the array of buttons. Beneath the buttons, there's a manual override keyhole. It bypasses the digital mainframe and connects directly to the analog backup generator I installed. I scrambled to the panel, shining my light on it. I don't have a key. The fob, he wheezed. Slide the silver latch on the side of the car fob. I looked down at the heavy black key fob in my hand. My slick fingers fumbled with it, sliding a tiny silver switch on the side. A small, physical titanium key popped out like a switchblade. Got it. I shoved the key into the small slot beneath the buttons and turned it sharply to the right. Immediately, a harsh, mechanical buzzing filled the elevator shaft. The red emergency lights flickered on, bathing the car in an eerie, crimson glow. The elevator shuddered violently once, twice, and then began to descend again, faster this time, no longer bound by the safety regulators of the main system. It's working, I breathed, sliding down the wall and letting out a shaky exhale. Ethan was watching me. In the red emergency lighting, his pale face looked ghostly, but his eyes were piercing. He was breathing heavily, fighting the encroaching darkness of shock, but his focus was entirely on me. You're brave, he murmured, his voice thick. For an Omega. I bristled, my jaw tightening. My secondary gender has nothing to do with my will to live, Mr. Sterling. The world just assumes Omegas are helpless because alphas like you built the system that way. It was a dangerous thing to say to a pure-blood alpha CEO, let alone the one who signed my meager paychecks. But the night had stripped away my filters. To my surprise, Ethan didn't growl. He didn't pull rank. He just let out a slow, rattling breath. Point taken. Ding. The digital display hit SUB-4. The elevator slowed, the hydraulic brakes engaging with a heavy hiss, and the steel doors slid open. The underground garage was a vast, cavernous expanse of concrete and fluorescent lights. It was freezing cold down here, the air smelling of motor oil, damp earth, and exhaust. Bay 12 was directly ahead of us. Sitting in the center of the VIP bay was the most beautiful, intimidating machine I had ever seen. The Obsidian was a massive, custom-built SUV, completely blacked out. It looked less like a car and more like a tactical military vehicle wrapped in the shell of a luxury sports car. There, Ethan said. Help me up. I dragged him to his feet. He was fading fast. We stumbled out of the elevator, moving as quickly as his failing legs would allow. The silence of the garage was heavy, oppressive. Every scuff of my rubber shoes echoed against the concrete pillars. We were halfway to the vehicle when the sharp, distinct sound of a bullet ricocheting off a concrete pillar shattered the quiet. Down! I screamed, using all my momentum to tackle Ethan to the cold, oily floor just as a second bullet shattered the taillight of a nearby sedan. They had men waiting in the garage. Ethan hissed through his teeth, clutching his side in agony as the impact jostled his wound. Over there, by the VIP bays, a voice echoed from across the cavernous lot. The keys, Ethan grunted, grabbing my arm. Press the center button twice. It opens the passenger door remotely. You have to run for it. I am not leaving you on the floor. I'll cover you, Ethan said, and to my absolute shock, he pulled a sleek, compact firearm from an ankle holster hidden beneath the hem of his ruined trousers. He cocked it with a practiced, terrifying smoothness. When I start firing, you run. Get in, start the engine, and drive it over here. The armor will protect us. You're a CEO, not a soldier, I protested, my eyes wide. I'm a Sterling, he replied coldly, the alpha predator finally baring its teeth. We are both. Go. He propped himself up on one elbow and fired 3 rapid shots into the darkness. Shouts of alarm erupted from the mercenaries, followed by a hail of return fire that chewed into the concrete pillar shielding us. I didn't think. I just moved. I scrambled up and sprinted across the open asphalt, pressing the center button on the fob twice. The massive passenger door of the Obsidian swung open like a vault. Bullets sparked against the pavement at my feet, one buzzing so close to my cheek I felt the wind of it. I dove into the plush, leather interior of the SUV, immediately scrambling over the massive center console to get to the driver's seat. The dashboard lit up like a fighter jet cockpit. I slammed my foot on the brake and hit the ignition button. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural, earth-shaking rumble that vibrated through my bones. I threw the massive vehicle into drive, stomped on the gas, and wrenched the steering wheel hard. The heavy tires shrieked against the concrete as I swung the armored beast around, positioning the thick steel frame between the shooters and Ethan. Get in! I screamed, throwing the passenger door open. Ethan scrambled off the floor, his face pale as a sheet. He practically fell into the passenger seat, pulling the heavy door shut behind him with a solid thud. Just as it closed, 3 bullets slammed against the reinforced glass of his window, leaving nothing but spiderweb fractures in the thick, bulletproof material. They're coming, I yelled, looking in the rearview mirror. Dark figures were sprinting across the lot, assault rifles raised. Drive, Ethan gasped, his head falling back against the headrest, the gun slipping from his fingers to the floorboard. Break the gate. Just go. I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed my foot all the way down on the accelerator. The Obsidian launched forward with terrifying speed, pressing me back into the seat. We tore through the underground garage, blowing past the toll booths and heading straight for the heavy steel security gate that sealed the exit ramp. Hold on, I shouted. We hit the gate at 70 miles an hour. The heavy steel crumpled like tin foil against the reinforced grille of the SUV, flying off its hinges and clattering violently onto the street. We burst out into the cool, damp night air of the city, tires screeching as I drifted the massive vehicle onto the rain-slicked asphalt of the main avenue, leaving the blazing chaos of Sterling Enterprises behind us. I kept my foot on the gas, weaving wildly through the sparse midnight traffic, my heart hammering in my throat. We had made it out. We were alive. I glanced over at Ethan. He was completely unconscious now, his chest barely rising and falling. Okay, I muttered to myself, my grip on the leather steering wheel white-knuckled. Hospital. We need a hospital. Or the police. No. The voice was barely a whisper, weak and breathless, but it stopped me cold. Ethan's eyes were still closed, but he forced the words out with the last ounce of his strength. No hospitals, he breathed. No police. Blackwood, they own the precinct. They'll finish the job, and they'll kill you. He let out a long, rattling exhale, and his head rolled to the side. He was completely out. I stared at the road ahead, the neon city lights blurring through my panicked tears. I couldn't go to the police. I couldn't take him to a hospital. And I certainly couldn't take a dying billionaire and a highly classified corporate drive back to my tiny apartment where my 4-year-old son was sleeping. I was completely, utterly alone, with the most powerful man in the city bleeding to death in my passenger seat. End of Part 3. Part 4. The Outskirts. The city of Seattle blurred into a chaotic stream of neon rain and red taillights as I tore through the midnight streets. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel of the Obsidian so tightly my knuckles were entirely white. The massive, armored SUV handled like a tank, its engine growling with a deep, menacing power that felt completely foreign to me. Beside me, Ethan Sterling was completely silent. Too silent. The erratic, shallow rise and fall of his chest was the only proof that the city's most feared alpha was still alive. No hospitals. No police. Blackwood owns the precinct. His breathless warning echoed in my mind, a terrifying loop that left me with absolutely zero safe options. I couldn't take him to a hospital. If the corporate mercenaries hunting him had the local police on their payroll, walking into an ER would be a death sentence for both of us. And I absolutely could not go home. The thought of my small, dilapidated apartment sent a spike of pure terror through my chest. Noah was there. My sweet, 4-year-old boy was fast asleep in his tiny bed, completely oblivious to the fact that his father was currently covered in blood and driving a stolen billionaire's tactical vehicle. If I led these heavily armed killers to my doorstep, Noah would be caught in the crossfire. That was not an option. It would never be an option. I would die before I let anything hurt my pup. Think, Liam, think, I muttered frantically, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. No flashing sirens yet. The rain had started to come down hard, washing the streets in a slick, dark sheen that helped cover our tracks. I needed a place that was completely off the grid, a place no one cared about. Then, a memory sparked in the chaotic darkness of my panicked mind. Before I secured the graveyard shift at Sterling Enterprises, I used to clean foreclosed commercial properties for a sketchy real estate agency. One of those properties was an abandoned, bankrupt veterinary clinic on the absolute edge of the industrial district, right by the old shipping yards. It had been boarded up for years, tied in endless legal disputes. The electricity was dead, but it had running water, heavy steel doors, and most importantly, it was utterly invisible to the rest of the world. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, taking a hard right turn that sent the heavy SUV skidding slightly on the wet pavement. We plunged into the labyrinth of the industrial district. The towering glass skyscrapers were quickly replaced by rusted shipping containers, decaying warehouses, and flickering, broken streetlights. It took me 15 agonizing minutes to navigate the maze of the docks. Finally, the low, brick structure of the old clinic materialized through the heavy curtain of rain. It looked exactly as I remembered, desolate, forgotten, and swallowed by overgrown weeds. I drove the obsidian around to the back alley, pulling it directly into a rusted, corrugated metal loading bay to hide it from the main street. I killed the engine. The sudden silence in the cabin was deafening, broken only by the heavy drumming of rain against the reinforced roof. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached over the center console, pressing 2 trembling fingers to the pulse point on Ethan's neck. It was there, but it was incredibly fast and terrifyingly weak. He was slipping into hypovolemic shock. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. This is going to be rough," I whispered. I threw open the driver's door and ran to the back of the SUV. Ethan had mentioned this was a tactical vehicle. Sure enough, built into the reinforced trunk was a heavy-duty, military-grade trauma kit. It was a massive red case, practically glowing in the dim light. I grabbed it, hoisted it over my shoulder, and rushed to the passenger side. Getting a pureblood alpha out of a high-clearance vehicle when he is completely dead weight is a monumental task. I practically caught him as he fell out of the door, his massive frame crushing me against the side of the car. I gritted my teeth, wrapping my arms tight around his waist, careful to avoid the blood-soaked packing tape I had applied earlier. The heavy steel door of the clinic's back entrance was secured with a rusty padlock. I didn't have a key, but I had desperation. I grabbed a heavy tire iron from the obsidian's trunk, wedged it behind the lock, and threw my entire body weight against it. With a harsh screech of tearing metal, the bracket gave way. I dragged Ethan inside, kicking the heavy door shut behind us and locking the deadbolt. The clinic was freezing, smelling of dust, mildew, and ancient antiseptic. The only light came from the ambient glow of the street lamps filtering through the dirt-caked, barred windows. I hauled him down the dark hallway, my muscles screaming in protest, until we reached the main surgical room. In the center sat a cold, stainless steel examination table. With one final, desperate heave, I pushed him onto the metal surface. He groaned, a low, agonizing sound, but didn't wake. I ripped open the red trauma kit. It was a masterpiece of emergency medicine. It had sterile saline, surgical shears, sutures, high-grade local anesthetics, combat gauze, and heavy-duty antibiotics. "Okay," I breathed, trying to steady my shaking hands. "I can do this. I fix scraped knees all the time. This is just a really big scraped knee." I grabbed the surgical shears and approached the table. I cut away the ruined remnants of his expensive charcoal suit jacket, tossing the heavy, blood-soaked fabric to the floor. Next came the white dress shirt. I sliced up the center, peeling the fabric back. Despite the horrific amount of blood, Ethan Sterling's physique was undeniable. He was built like a classic alpha, broad shoulders, deeply defined abdominal muscles, and a chest scarred with faint, old marks that told a story of a violent past he hid beneath bespoke suits. His skin was incredibly pale, covered in a sheen of cold sweat. I used a pair of scissors to carefully cut away the thick layer of packing tape and microfiber cloths I had applied in the supply closet. The makeshift bandage was completely saturated. As I pulled it away, I finally saw the wound. The bullet had not lodged inside him. It had ripped a harsh, jagged groove through the fleshy side of his waist, tearing through muscle but miraculously missing his vital organs. It was a through-and-through graze, but it was deep, and it was bleeding sluggishly. "You're lucky," I muttered to him, even though he couldn't hear me. "A millimeter to the left, and you'd be missing a kidney." I broke open a bottle of sterile saline and poured it directly over the wound to clean out the debris and clotting blood. The moment the cold liquid hit his raw flesh, Ethan's body violently arched off the metal table. His eyes snapped open, wide, wild, and glowing with an eerie, primal blue light in the darkness. A deafening, feral growl tore from his chest, bouncing off the tiled walls. Before I could step back, his hand shot out, his long fingers wrapping around my throat. He didn't squeeze, but the grip was absolute. He pinned me against the edge of the steel table, his chest heaving, his eyes entirely unfocused. He wasn't Ethan Sterling, the billionaire CEO, right now. He was a wounded, cornered alpha predator reacting entirely on instinct. The heavy, suffocating scent of petrichor and lightning exploded into the room, so sharp and aggressive it made my eyes water. It was meant to dominate, to force any threats into submission. "Ethan," I gasped, gripping his thick wrist with both hands. "Ethan, stop. It's me." He didn't hear me. The fever and blood loss had triggered a brutal defensive state. His jaw clenched, his canine teeth visibly elongated, ready to tear into whatever was hurting him. My own biological instincts, buried beneath years of scent blockers and suppression, suddenly flared to life. I couldn't fight him with strength. I had to fight him with biology. I stopped struggling. I let my hands drop from his wrist, rendering myself entirely vulnerable. I forced my heart rate to slow, looking directly into his wild, glowing eyes. And then, I let my scent go. I pushed past the chemical barriers of the blockers I had taken hours ago. I released a concentrated wave of pure, unfiltered Omega pheromones. Warm vanilla, sweet chamomile, and the deep, rich scent of a safe nest flooded the freezing room. It was a scent designed by nature to soothe, to calm, to pacify an aggressive alpha. The reaction was instantaneous. Ethan's ferocious growl hitched in his throat. The glowing, feral light in his eyes flickered, blinking away to reveal profound confusion. His nose twitched, drawing in a ragged breath. The oppressive storm of his petrichor scent immediately softened, the sharp lightning fading into the smell of a gentle, rolling rain. His grip on my throat loosened, his fingers sliding down to rest heavily on my collarbone. He leaned forward, burying his face into the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. "Safe," he mumbled, his voice a broken, raspy vibration against my skin. "Smells safe." "You are safe," I whispered softly, bringing one hand up to gently stroke the damp, dark hair at the nape of his neck. My other hand reached blindly for the local anesthetic syringe in the trauma kit. "But you have to let me finish. It's going to sting." He let out a low, pathetic whine, a sound I never thought I would hear from a man like him. He didn't pull away from my neck. He simply nodded, clinging to me like a lifeline. Working mostly by feel and the dim street light, I injected the numbing agent around the jagged edges of the bullet wound. Ethan flinched, his fingers digging into my shoulders, but he stayed still, kept grounded by the steady stream of my calming pheromones. Once the area was numb, I grabbed the pre-threaded curved needle. "Deep breath," I commanded gently. I worked as quickly as I could. I wasn't a surgeon, but I had stitched up my own fair share of deep cuts when I couldn't afford a doctor. I pulled the torn flesh together, pulling the heavy black sutures tight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches. By the time I tied off the final knot and taped a thick, sterile combat dressing over the closed wound, my arms were shaking with exhaustion. "Done," I breathed, stepping back slightly. Ethan's head rolled to the side. The wildness was gone from his eyes, replaced by complete exhaustion. The pain had subsided to a dull roar, thanks to the anesthetic. He looked at me, his gaze trailing from my face down to my blood-stained janitorial uniform. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice laced with absolute disbelief. "You could have taken the car. You could have left me to die." "I have a son," I said quietly, wiping my bloody hands on a clean towel. "I know what it means to be left behind. I wouldn't do that to anyone." Silence settled over the cold, dark clinic. For a moment, it was just the two of us, a billionaire alpha and a janitor omega, hidden away from the deadly chaos of the city. He watched me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, not with fear, but but with something entirely unfamiliar. Then a sharp, piercing beep shattered the quiet. I jumped. The sound wasn't coming from the medical equipment. It was coming from me. I reached into the pocket of my uniform pants and pulled out the matte black, encrypted flash drive Ethan had given me in the closet. The tiny device, previously dormant, was now blinking with a rapid, bright red LED light. Beep, beep, beep. Ethan's eyes widened in sheer horror. The drive. They activated the failsafe remotely. What does that mean? I asked, my heart plummeting to my stomach. It's a localized distress beacon, Ethan ground out, struggling to sit up on the metal table, his face turning pale green with the effort. It pings its location to the nearest Blackwood server every 10 seconds. The blood drained from my face. We had driven blindly into a trap of our own making. How close are they? I whispered. Outside, above the heavy sound of the pouring rain, the distinct rhythmic thud of a low-flying helicopter blade suddenly vibrated through the roof of the abandoned clinic. A massive, blinding white spotlight swept across the barred windows, lighting the surgical room up like it was broad daylight. They're already here, Ethan said softly. End of Part 4. Part 5, The Lead Sanctuary. The blinding white beam of the helicopter's spotlight cut through the grime-caked, barred windows of the abandoned clinic like a physical blade. It swept across the stainless steel surgical table, illuminating the fresh blood, the scattered medical supplies, and the terrified expression on my face. The sheer force of the rotor blades thumping through the heavy rain vibrated in my teeth, shaking dust and loose plaster from the ceiling in a steady, ghostly snowfall. And in the palm of my trembling hand, the encrypted flash drive continued its relentless, rhythmic betrayal. Beep, beep, beep. Every flash of the red LED was a beacon screaming our exact coordinates to the heavily armed Blackwood mercenaries. Panic, cold and absolute, poured into my veins, freezing my lungs. I was going to die in a decaying veterinary clinic. I was never going to see Noah again. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow, making my knees buckle. Liam. The voice was a harsh, guttural command that snapped me out of my spiraling terror. Ethan Sterling, despite having just been sewn together without general anesthesia, was sliding off the surgical table. His face was a mask of deathly pallor, his jaw locked in agony, but his icy blue eyes were entirely lucid, blazing with an indomitable alpha willpower that defied biological logic. He lunged forward, snatching the blinking drive from my frozen fingers. "Where is the X-ray room?" he demanded, his voice barely a rasp over the deafening roar of the chopper outside. I blinked, my brain struggling to process the abrupt question. "What?" "Ethan, they're right outside. Veterinary clinics have X-ray rooms, Liam. They are lined with thick sheets of lead to protect the staff from radiation," he interrupted, gripping my shoulders with his large, heavy hands, forcing me to look directly at him. "Lead blocks electromagnetic signals. It will kill the tracker's ping. Where is it?" My mind raced, frantically digging through the 4-year-old memories of my time scrubbing the floors of this exact building. I visualized the blueprints. Down the hall. Last door on the right, just before the basement stairs. "Go," he ordered, shoving me lightly toward the door. "I'm right behind you." We burst out of the surgical room just as the spotlight swept back, narrowly missing us. The hallway was a pitch-black tunnel, the air thick with the smell of rotting drywall and ancient animal panic. I ran, my rubber-soled shoes slipping slightly on the damp linoleum, with Ethan heavy on my heels. I could hear his strained, ragged breathing, every step costing him a monumental amount of energy. The stitches were holding, but the sheer trauma of his blood loss was catching up to him. We reached the heavy, reinforced door at the end of the corridor. Above it, a faded, cracked plastic sign read, "Radiology." I grabbed the brass handle and threw my weight backward. The door, heavy with its internal lead plating, groaned in protest but swung open. We stumbled into the pitch-black room, and I shoved the door shut with a solid, echoing thud. The moment the heavy door sealed, the deafening roar of the helicopter was instantly muffled, reduced to a heavy, distant thrumming. The darkness in the room was absolute, suffocatingly dense. "The apron," Ethan gasped out in the dark. "Find the protective apron." I pulled out my penlight, flicking it on. The narrow beam illuminated a small, cramped room dominated by a massive, rusted X-ray machine. Hanging on a hook in the corner was a heavy, dust-covered lead apron used by veterinarians. I grabbed it. It weighed at least 20 pounds. "Got it." Ethan held out the drive. It was still flashing its angry red warning. I practically tore the drive from his hand, placed it in the center of the heavy apron, and folded the thick, lead-lined fabric over it again and again, rolling it into a tight, dense bundle. I shoved the bundle under a heavy metal cabinet for good measure. Did it work? I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Ethan leaned heavily against the wall, sliding down slightly until he was sitting on the edge of a low counter. He closed his eyes, tilting his head back. The ping transmits every 10 seconds. We just have to wait. The silence in the cramped room was agonizing. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Outside, the steady, circling hum of the helicopter suddenly changed pitch. It flared loudly, then began to hover in a fixed position. The rhythmic, sweeping pattern of the spotlight stopped. They lost the signal, Ethan breathed, a harsh, humorless smile touching the corner of his lips. The blind spot worked. They know we're in this sector, but they don't have our exact coordinates anymore. Before I could even sigh in relief, a series of heavy, metallic thuds echoed from above us, vibrating through the roof of the clinic. Thud, thud, thud. My blood ran cold. What was that? Fast ropes, Ethan said grimly, the smile vanishing entirely. They can't pinpoint the drive, so they are deploying ground teams. They're going to sweep the building room by room. We have less than 2 minutes before they breach that door. Panic, which had momentarily receded, surged back with a vengeance. We were trapped in a windowless, lead-lined box at the end of a dead-end hallway. There was nowhere to run. In the cramped darkness, the space between us felt impossibly small. The penlight in my hand cast long, dramatic shadows across Ethan's face. He looked exhausted, broken, yet undeniably lethal. Without thinking, I stepped closer to him, the deep, biological Omega instinct to seek the protection of an alpha in times of mortal danger pulling at me. My scent blockers were completely gone now. The small room was rapidly filling with the thick, sweet aroma of vanilla and chamomile, clashing with the sharp, ozone tang of his thunderstorm scent. Ethan's eyes opened. In the dim light, they were fixed squarely on me. He reached out, his large hand gently wrapping around my wrist. His thumb brushed over my racing pulse point. "You unleashed your scent earlier," he murmured, his voice dropping into a low, rumbling register that vibrated straight through to my core. "In the surgical room. You did it on purpose, to pull me out of a feral state." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "You were going to rip my throat out, Mr. Sterling. I did what I had to do." "Ethan," he corrected softly. "Call me Ethan. And you know what it means for an unbonded Omega to expose their scent to a feral alpha. It's a submission of absolute trust. It's incredibly dangerous. You risked yourself to save me." "I told you, I want to go home to my son," I whispered, tears of sheer frustration and fear welling in my eyes. I didn't want his gratitude. I wanted a way out. And right now, it looks like neither of us is making it out of this room. Ethan's grip on my wrist tightened, not with aggression, but with a fierce, burning promise. The alpha predator inside him, fueled by the scent of a distressed Omega, roared to the surface. He pulled me slightly closer, his chest brushing against mine. "Listen to me, Liam," he commanded, his voice ironclad and unwavering. "You are not dying here. I am the CEO of a global empire. I have fought off corporate vultures, assassins, and absolute monsters. I will not let a pack of Blackwood mercenaries take the life of the man who saved mine. I swear on my blood, I will get you home to Noah." When an alpha makes a blood oath, it is a visceral, biological contract. I felt the weight of his words settle over me, a heavy, protective blanket that somehow managed to quiet the frantic screaming in my mind. "How?" I asked, my voice trembling. Before he could answer, a massive, deafening explosion rocked the building. The floor violently shook, knocking me off balance and directly into Ethan's chest. He grunted in pain but wrapped his arms tightly around me, shielding me as dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. "They blew the back doors," Ethan said, his voice directly in my ear, his breath hot against my neck. "They are inside the clinic." "The basement," I suddenly remembered, pulling back to look at him. "The door right next to this one leads down to the old basement. When I used to clean this place, I found a heavy iron grate in the floor down there. It's an old drainage pipe. It connects directly to the city's underground storm drain system that empties out near the shipping channels." Ethan's eyes lit up. "A subterranean exit. Are the pipes large enough to crawl through?" "Yes, but they're pitch black, flooded, and they smell like death," I warned. "Better than actually being dead," he replied, pushing himself off the counter. He grabbed his fallen firearm, checking the magazine. We have to move. Now. I cracked the heavy lead door open. The hallway was filled with thick, gray smoke. Down the corridor, at the entrance to the surgical room, I could see the harsh, sweeping beams of tactical flashlights cutting through the haze. Sweep the east wing. Check the medical supplies. A deep, modulated voice barked over the radio. We slipped out of the X-ray room, hugging the wall. We moved silently to the adjacent door, the one leading to the basement. I turned the handle. It was unlocked. We slipped inside, gently clicking the door shut just as the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots approached the end of the hall. The basement stairs were wooden, rotting, and terrifyingly steep. We descended into the abyss, my penlight providing the only illumination. The air down here was frigid, thick with the smell of stagnant water, mold, and salt from the nearby ocean. We reached the concrete floor. The basement was massive, cluttered with rusted cages and old, broken medical equipment. I led Ethan through the maze of junk to the far corner. There, set into the concrete, was a heavy, circular iron grate. "Help me lift it," I whispered. Ethan holstered his gun and grabbed one side of the rusted iron, while I grabbed the other. We pulled with everything we had. The metal shrieked in protest, a terrible, grinding sound that echoed loudly in the cavernous space. The grate popped free, sliding to the side. Below us was a dark, circular tunnel, roughly 4 feet in diameter. I could hear the sound of rushing water echoing from deep within. "Ladies first," Ethan muttered, a dry, completely inappropriate smirk flashing across his pale face. I glared at him, but didn't argue. I swung my legs into the hole and dropped down. I landed in calf-deep, freezing water. The smell of sewage and brine was instantly overpowering. Ethan followed, dropping down heavily beside me. I reached up and pulled the heavy iron grate back into place, sealing us in the underground pipe. We waded forward into the claustrophobic darkness, hunched over, moving as quickly as the water would allow. We had gone perhaps 50 yards into the tunnel when the sound of the basement door above us being kicked open echoed through the pipe. "They found the grate," a voice shouted from the basement. I urged Ethan to move faster, panic lending strength to my exhausted legs. But suddenly, Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. His hand shot out, grabbing my uniform shirt and jerking me to a halt. "Ethan, what are you doing? They're right behind us," I hissed. Ethan didn't answer. He stood perfectly still in the freezing water, his head tilted slightly, his nose flaring. The blue glow returned to his eyes, brighter and more terrified than before. He looked down at me, and for the first time tonight, the great Ethan Sterling looked genuinely afraid. "They didn't just send mercenaries," he whispered, his voice trembling with sheer horror. "They brought a bloodhound." From deep within the tunnel behind us, a sound echoed off the damp concrete walls. It wasn't the shout of a soldier. It was a roar, a deep, guttural, terrifyingly feral roar of an artificially enhanced alpha predator that had just caught the scent of my vanilla and chamomile. The hunt had truly begun. End of Part 5. Part 6. The Apex Predator. The roar tore through the subterranean pipe like a physical shockwave, rattling my teeth and vibrating through the freezing, knee-deep water we were standing in. It wasn't human. It was too deep, too distorted, carrying the raw, unfiltered bloodlust of a starving animal. My heart slammed against my ribs so violently I thought it might shatter them. I gripped Ethan's ruined shirt, my knuckles white. "What is a bloodhound?" I breathed, my voice barely a squeak in the claustrophobic dark. Ethan's face was an absolute mask of terror, a stark contrast to the collected, intimidating billionaire I had met just a few hours ago. The blue glow in his eyes, his raw alpha instinct, was flaring wildly. "Blackwood Enterprises doesn't just deal in weapons," Ethan rasped, his chest heaving as he pulled me forward, forcing us to move through the sludge. "They have an off-the-books biotechnology division. They take alphas, usually mercenaries or criminals, and subject them to illegal genetic modifications. They pump them full of combat stimulants, suppress their higher brain functions, and amplify their predatory instincts until there is nothing left but a feral, unstoppable killing machine." He stumbled, groaning as the freezing water splashed against his freshly stitched wound. I caught him, throwing his heavy arm over my shoulder once again, practically dragging him through the dark water. "They use them for Black Ops hunting," Ethan continued, his breath hot and ragged against my ear. "They track by scent. Once a bloodhound locks onto a pheromone signature, it will not stop until it tears the prey apart. And you, Liam, you took off your scent blockers. You flooded the clinic with your Omega pheromones to save me. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. The sweet, warm scent of vanilla and chamomile that I had used to calm Ethan's feral state was now a glowing neon sign leading a monster straight to us. The freezing, rancid water of the sewer had washed away whatever traces of bleach were left on my shoes. I was completely exposed. How fast are they? I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. Faster than us, Ethan replied grimly. Behind us, the heavy, splashing thuds of something massive hitting the water echoed down the pipe. The sound was terrifyingly rapid. The beast was sprinting on all fours, tearing through the flooded tunnel with impossible speed. A low, wet snarl reverberated off the concrete walls, growing louder by the second. Keep moving, Ethan commanded, forcing his failing legs to push harder against the current. We waded through the darkness, the beam of my tiny penlight bouncing erratically across the curved, slime-coated walls. The pipe was a straight, endless shot, offering absolutely no cover, no side tunnels to duck into. The water was rising, creeping up past our knees, filled with rotting debris and freezing sludge that numbed my legs. Every step was a monumental battle against exhaustion and terror. I thought of Noah. I pictured his soft, sleeping face, his little hands clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. If I died down here in this lightless abyss, he would wake up tomorrow to an empty apartment. He would wait by the door, and I would never come home. No. A fierce, protective fury ignited in my chest, burning away the icy paralyzation of my fear. I wasn't just an Omega running for his life. I was a father. And I refused to let my son become an orphan because of some corporate war I had nothing to do with. There! I shouted, pointing the penlight ahead. About 50 yards away, the narrow pipe opened up into a massive, cavernous storm drain junction. It was a huge, cylindrical chamber made of ancient, crumbling brick, where 3 different sewer lines converged into a central, rushing waterfall that dropped into a deeper abyss. We have to make it to the junction, I grunted, practically carrying Ethan's weight now. The splashing behind us grew deafening. The Bloodhound was close. I could hear its ragged, wet breathing, the clicking of its claws against the submerged concrete. The heavy, suffocating scent of rotting meat and burnt adrenaline began to overpower the smell of the sewer, making my stomach violently churn. We burst out of the narrow pipe and into the massive, echoing chamber of the junction. The roar of the rushing water was immense. A rusted metal catwalk circled the perimeter of the room, leading toward a heavy iron ladder that stretched up into the darkness toward a street-level manhole cover. The ladder! I yelled over the roar of the water. We scrambled onto the rusted metal grating of the catwalk, collapsing onto our hands and knees. Ethan coughed violently, a splash of dark blood staining his pale lips. He was completely at his limit. The adrenaline was wearing off, and hypovolemic shock was setting in again. Before we could even stand, a massive figure exploded from the pipe we had just exited. It landed on the metal catwalk with a deafening crash that bowed the heavy iron grating. I aimed my penlight at it, and my breath instantly caught in my throat. It was horrifying. It was a man, but only technically. He was easily 6.5 feet tall, completely shirtless, his skin a sickly, pale gray tightly stretched over bulging, unnaturally thick muscles. His veins were thick and black, pulsing with whatever toxic stimulants Blackwood had pumped into him. His jaw hung slack, thick saliva dripping from elongated, razor-sharp canine teeth. But it was his eyes that truly paralyzed me. They were completely, uniformly black. There was no white, no iris, just endless, soulless voids fixed directly on me. The Bloodhound threw its head back and unleashed a deafening, vibrating roar that shook the rust from the ceiling. It inhaled deeply, its twisted face contorting in predatory ecstasy as it tasted the vanilla and chamomile in the air. "Liam, get behind me," Ethan growled. I stared in shock as Ethan Sterling, bleeding out and barely able to stand, pushed himself in front of me. He drew the compact firearm from his holster with a shaking hand. He was a billionaire CEO, a man who commanded boardrooms from glass towers, but in this dark, rotting abyss, he was stripping away the veneer of civilization. The blue fire in his eyes blazed with magnificent, terrifying intensity. He was an alpha standing between a predator and his Omega. The Bloodhound didn't hesitate. It launched itself forward, crossing the distance in a single, terrifying leap. Ethan fired. Bang, bang, bang. 3 shots hit the beast dead in the chest. Sparks flew as the bullets struck the heavy combat plating grafted beneath its skin. The beast barely flinched, the impact only enraging it further. The Bloodhound crashed into Ethan, sending them both flying across the catwalk. The gun clattered away, slipping through the iron grating and splashing into the raging waterfall below. Ethan cried out in agony as he hit the rusted metal, his stitched wound taking the full force of the impact. "Ethan!" I screamed. The beast straddled him, raising a massive, clawed fist to crush Ethan's skull. I didn't think. The maternal, fiercely protective instinct of an Omega is just as dangerous as an alpha's aggression when triggered. I grabbed the heavy, rusted iron wrench I had carried in my pocket since the closet on the 50th floor. With a primal scream, I charged forward and swung with everything I had. The heavy steel cracked against the side of the Bloodhound's skull with a sickening crunch. The beast roared, stumbling off Ethan and turning its pitch-black eyes on me. It didn't look hurt, it just looked furious. It lunged, a massive hand wrapping around my throat, lifting me completely off the catwalk. My air was instantly cut off. I kicked, thrashing wildly, my hands prying at its thick, iron-like fingers, but it was like trying to move a brick wall. The beast pulled me close, opening its jaws to bite directly into my scent gland on the side of my neck. "Get your hands off my Omega." Ethan was on his feet. He had pulled the heavy, tactical combat knife from his ankle holster. With a guttural roar, he drove the blade to the hilt directly into the side of the Bloodhound's neck, right where the armor plating ended. The beast let out a bubbling shriek, dropping me to the floor. I collapsed, gasping greedily for air, my throat bruising instantly. The Bloodhound blindly swung at Ethan, its massive fist catching the billionaire in the ribs. I heard the distinct crack of breaking bone. Ethan was thrown backward, sliding dangerously close to the edge of the catwalk where the waterfall roared into the black abyss. The monster reached up, grabbing the handle of the knife and ripping it from its own neck in a spray of black blood. It turned back to Ethan, preparing to finish him. "Ethan, the pipe!" I screamed, noticing the environment. Directly above the Bloodhound's head was a massive, highly pressurized, rusted steam pipe running along the ceiling. Ethan followed my gaze. He didn't have his gun, but he had something else. As the beast charged him, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the encrypted Blackwood flash drive, the heavy metal rectangle that had started this entire nightmare. With a terrifying battle cry, he threw it with all his remaining alpha strength directly at the rusted valve of the pressurized pipe. The heavy metal drive struck the ancient valve with pinpoint accuracy. The rusted metal shattered. A deafening, whistling shriek filled the chamber as a massive geyser of blinding, scalding hot steam erupted from the pipe directly into the Bloodhound's face. The beast screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, blinded and burning. It stumbled backward, thrashing wildly, its foot slipping on the slick, blood-covered grating. Ethan didn't miss a beat. He threw his entire body weight forward, slamming his shoulder into the beast's chest. The Bloodhound tipped backward over the edge of the catwalk. It let out one final, echoing roar before plunging down into the roaring waterfall, disappearing into the black, churning abyss below. Silence slammed back into the chamber, save for the rush of the water and the hiss of the steam. Ethan stood at the edge for a fraction of a second before his knees buckled. He collapsed onto the iron grating, his chest heaving, his skin ashen. Blood was rapidly pooling beneath him. The stitches had torn completely open. I scrambled to his side, tears streaming down my face. "Ethan! Ethan, stay with me. We have to climb the ladder." "I can't," he whispered, his eyes rolling back. "Liam, I can't. You promised me." I sobbed, grabbing his face, smearing my own blood and grime across his pale cheeks. "You swore on your blood you would get me home to Noah. You do not get to break an oath, Ethan Sterling. Get up." The mention of the oath of my son flickered a tiny, dying ember in his eyes. He let out a ragged, agonizing breath and nodded weakly. Together, inch by brutal inch, we crawled toward the heavy iron ladder leading to the surface. End of Part 6. Part 7, Ghosts in the Rain. The rusted iron ladder stretching up into the pitch-black vertical shaft looked less like an escape route and more like an instrument of torture. Every rung was coated in decades of freezing, slick slime, and the sheer height of the climb was daunting even for a healthy man. For a man who had just had his abdomen sliced open by a bullet, hastily stitched, and then violently torn open again, it was an absolute death sentence. Ethan collapsed at the base of the ladder, his large frame hitting the metal grating with a sickening thud. The water of the subterranean junction rushed around us, deafening and cold, but the only sound I focused on was the terrible, wet rattling of his breath. His bespoke charcoal trousers were completely ruined, soaked in a horrifying mixture of black sewer water and his own bright, arterial blood. "Ethan," I gasped, dropping to my knees beside him. The icy water soaked right through my thin janitorial pants, but I barely felt it. I grabbed his face, forcing his heavy, drooping head up. "Look at me. You have to look at me." His eyelids fluttered. The fierce, burning blue light of his alpha instinct that had saved us from the Bloodhound was entirely gone, replaced by a dull, glassy exhaustion. "Liam," he whispered, his voice so faint it was almost stolen by the echoing waterfall. "Go. The ladder. You can make it." "Shut up," I snarled, a wave of pure, unadulterated Omega panic and fury crashing over me. It wasn't a request. It was a biological command. "You are not dying down here in the dark. I am not letting my son's savior rot in a sewer. Now get your arm over my shoulder." He didn't have the strength to argue. With a gut-wrenching groan of agony, Ethan reached up. I ducked under his heavy arm, wrapping both of my arms tightly around his waist, doing my best to avoid pressing directly against his torn side. "On 3, I grunted, my muscles screaming in anticipation. 1, 2, 3. Using leverage and sheer, desperate adrenaline, I hauled him upward. He caught the first rung with a trembling, blood-slicked hand. I pressed my back directly against his, pinning him to the ladder to keep him from falling backward into the abyss. "Climb," I ordered, my voice cracking. The ascent was a waking nightmare. We moved inch by agonizing inch. I was carrying at least half of his massive body weight, my own arms shaking violently as I pushed us upward. Every time Ethan pulled himself up to the next rung, a choked, broken sound escaped his lips, a sound of such profound pain that it made my heart ache. His blood dripped down, warm and sticky against my neck and shoulders, a stark contrast to the freezing environment. "Almost there," I chanted, a mantra meant as much for me as it was for him. "Just a little further, Ethan. Just a little further." Above us, the heavy, circular outline of the manhole cover finally materialized in the gloom. It was our ceiling, our barrier to the surface world. Ethan's hand hit the cold iron of the cover. He pushed, but he had absolutely no leverage, and his strength was entirely depleted. He let out a frustrated, despairing sigh, his head falling forward against his arm. "I can't," he breathed. "I've got it," I said. I shifted my weight, locking my legs around the rungs of the ladder to anchor myself. I placed both of my hands flat against the underside of the heavy iron disc. I thought of the Bloodhound below. I thought of the Blackwood mercenaries above. But mostly, I thought of a tiny 4-year-old boy named Noah, waiting for his father to come home. With a feral, screaming grunt, I thrust my arms upward with everything I had. The heavy iron cover shrieked, lifting an inch, then 2. Rainwater immediately poured through the gap, splashing directly into my eyes, but I didn't stop. I shoved hard to the right, sliding the heavy disc across the wet asphalt above. Cold, biting Seattle rain and the faint, amber glow of a distant streetlight poured into the shaft. I scrambled up, pulling myself out of the hole and collapsing onto the blessed, solid pavement of the alleyway. But I didn't have time to rest. I reached back down into the hole, grabbing Ethan by the collar of his ruined shirt and the belt of his trousers. "Come on," I screamed, pulling with frantic strength. Ethan scrambled over the edge, rolling onto the wet asphalt beside me. I quickly shoved the heavy manhole cover back into place, sealing the nightmare of the sewer beneath us. We were lying in a narrow, trash-strewn alley somewhere in the industrial district. The rain was coming down in absolute sheets, washing the grime and some of the blood from our skin. It was still the dead of night, the city around us silent and unaware of the war that had just raged beneath its streets. Ethan lay on his back, his chest barely rising. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, highlighting the deathly pallor of his skin. I crawled over to him, my hands hovering over his torn side. The combat dressing I had applied at the clinic was gone, ripped away during the fight with the Bloodhound. He was bleeding freely. "Ethan," I sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing, leaving behind nothing but cold terror. "I need to stop the bleeding. I looked around wildly. We had nothing. No medical supplies, no car, no phone. Suddenly, Ethan's hand twitched. His fingers, weak and trembling, reached into the front pocket of his ruined slacks. He pulled something out and pressed it into my hand. I looked down. In the amber glow of the streetlight, I saw the matte black, encrypted flash drive. I stared at it, my brain short-circuiting. But you threw it. In the sewer. You shattered the steam pipe with it. A weak, breathy chuckle escaped his lips, instantly turning into a wet cough. I threw my silver money clip, he rasped, his eyes barely open. I'm a CEO, Liam. I always have a decoy. The sheer audacity of the man, the calculated brilliance even in the face of a feral monster, left me entirely speechless. Keep it, he whispered, his hand falling back to the wet pavement. Keep it safe. I'm keeping you safe, I shot back, shoving the drive deep into my pocket. We need a doctor. A real one. And a place to hide. My mind raced. I couldn't go to a hospital. I couldn't go home. But there was one person in this massive, indifferent city who owed me a favor, and who despised the corporate alphas and the corrupt police force more than anyone else I knew. Marcus. Marcus was a grumpy, reclusive beta in his late 50s. He was an unlicensed, underground street medic who ran a clandestine clinic for unregistered Omegas and undocumented workers out of a dilapidated boxing gym about 10 blocks from the docks. I had saved his clinic from a fire 2 years ago, dragging him out of the smoke before the fire department arrived. He had told me if I ever needed a ghost to disappear, to come to him. I know a place, I told Ethan, grabbing his arm and pulling it over my shoulder. It's not a 5-star hotel, but it's safe. We just have to walk. Lead the way, he murmured, his voice fading. The 10-block walk was the longest journey of my life. We stuck to the deepest shadows of the alleys, avoiding the main streets entirely. Every time a car drove past, its headlights cutting through the rain, I pulled Ethan behind a dumpster or a brick wall, holding my breath until the vehicle faded into the distance. Ethan's weight grew heavier with every step. He was actively dying on my shoulder, his massive body shutting down from the immense trauma. The sharp, distressed scent of his petrichor pheromones was leaking out again, mixing heavily with the smell of the rain. I countered it instantly, flooding the cold air between us with my warm vanilla and chamomile, forcing his primal instincts to stay calm, to stay grounded to me. Almost there, I whispered, holding him impossibly tight. Don't you dare close your eyes, Ethan Sterling. Finally, the faded neon sign of Mickey's Boxing Club flickered into view through the downpour. The front of the building looked abandoned, the windows boarded up, but I knew the truth. I dragged Ethan down a side alley, approaching a heavy, unmarked steel door. I pounded on it, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Bang, bang, bang. Silence. Marcus, I screamed, not caring who heard me. Marcus, please. It's Liam. Open the door. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, the heavy scrape of a deadbolt sliding back echoed in the alley. The steel door creaked open an inch. A harsh, glaring light spilled out, illuminating a pair of suspicious, tired brown eyes. Liam, a gruff voice rasped. What the hell are you doing here at? Marcus stopped dead. His eyes widened, dropping from my bruised, tear-streaked face to the massive, blood-soaked alpha collapsing against my side. He's dying, Marcus. I sobbed, my voice breaking entirely. Please. I have nowhere else to go. Marcus was a seasoned street medic, a man who had seen the darkest sides of Seattle's underbelly. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He threw the heavy steel door wide open. Get him inside. Now. Marcus barked. We dragged Ethan into the bright, harsh fluorescent lighting of the underground clinic. It smelled strongly of rubbing alcohol, iodine, and stale coffee. Marcus pointed to a heavy, stainless steel surgical bed in the center of the room. We hoisted Ethan onto the bed. He was completely unresponsive now, his skin as white as a sheet of paper. Marcus immediately grabbed a pair of heavy trauma shears from a tray. What happened? He demanded, rapidly cutting away the remaining rags of Ethan's shirt and pants, exposing the horrific, gaping wound on his side. Gunshot. I blurted out, my hands shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. A through-and-through graze. I stitched it earlier, but he took a massive hit, and they tore open. He's lost so much blood, Marcus. Marcus looked at the wound, then up at Ethan's face. The medic's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated shock. Liam, is this Ethan Sterling? The CEO of Sterling Enterprises? Yes, I breathed. Jesus Christ, kid, Marcus cursed, rushing to a heavy glass cabinet. He pulled out bags of saline, for lines, and heavy-duty surgical equipment. Do you have any idea what kind of heat you brought to my door? The entire city is looking for him. What do you mean? I asked, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. Marcus pointed a bloody finger toward a small, muted television sitting on a desk in the corner of the room. Look. I walked over, my eyes fixing on the screen. It was a breaking news broadcast on a major local network. The footage showed the towering glass monolith of Sterling Enterprises, but the top floor, the executive suite where my shift had started, was completely engulfed in raging flames. Heavy black smoke billowed into the night sky. The cheerin at the bottom of the screen read in bold, glaring letters. Massive explosion at Sterling Enterprises. CEO Ethan Sterling presumed dead. They blew the floor, I whispered in horror. Blackwood blew the entire floor to cover their tracks. They wanted the world to think he died in a tragic accident. And the world believes it, Marcus said grimly, tying a tourniquet around Ethan's massive bicep and expertly sliding a large needle into his vein. Which means whoever did this isn't going to stop until they make sure the corpse matches the headline. Now get over here and hold pressure on his side while I prep the surgical field. We have to save this bastard's life before the ghosts come knocking. I rushed back to the table, pressing my hands firmly against Ethan's bleeding side. Despite the chaos, despite the horrifying news broadcast, Ethan's hand weakly lifted off the table, his cold, blood-stained fingers finding mine and intertwining with them. A silent, desperate anchor in a world that had just officially declared him a ghost. End of Part 7. Part 8, The Ghost and the Guardian. The underground clinic was a symphony of chaos and sterile smells. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a swarm of angry bees, casting a sickly, pale glow over the stainless steel surgical table. More pressure, Liam. Don't let up. Marcus barked, his hands moving with the practiced, frantic speed of a man who had pulled countless ghosts back from the brink of the abyss. I leaned all my weight onto the thick wad of sterile gauze pressed against Ethan's torn side. My arms were trembling with sheer exhaustion, my muscles burning from the climb out of the sewer, but I didn't dare lessen my grip. Beneath my hands, Ethan's skin was ice cold, completely devoid of the intense, feverish heat that usually radiated from a pure-blood alpha. I have pressure, I gritted out, my eyes locked on Ethan's pale, sweat-slicked face. His eyes were closed, his breathing terribly shallow. The only reassurance I had that he was still alive was the desperate, crushing grip his hand maintained on my own, his fingers intertwined with mine, as if I were the only thing tethering his soul to his body. The bullet grazed itself as clean, but the exertion tore the muscle wall entirely, Marcus muttered, his face shielded by a surgical mask as he clamped a bleeding vessel. I have to do a deep tissue closure. I'm pushing a heavy dose of fentanyl through the fore, but with an alpha's metabolism, it's going to burn through his system fast. He's going to feel this. Do it, I said fiercely. Just save him. Marcus grabbed a curved surgical needle threaded with thick, heavy-duty suture. The moment the metal pierced Ethan's raw flesh, the alpha's entire body went rigid. A horrifying, suffocated gasp tore from his lips, and his eyes flew open. They weren't the sharp, intelligent blue of the CEO. They were wild, dilated, and clouded with absolute agony. His grip on my hand tightened so fiercely I heard my own knuckles pop. A low, vibrating growl began to build in his chest, the primal sound of a wounded predator preparing to lash out. The heavy, oppressive scent of petrichor and lightning instantly flooded the cramped room, sharp enough to make my eyes water. He's going into a pain-induced frenzy. Marcus warned, stepping back slightly, his scalpel raised defensively. Liam, get back. If he snaps, he'll tear us both apart. No, I shouted, refusing to let go of Ethan's hand. I knew what I had to do. The biological mechanics of our secondary genders were ingrained in my DNA, buried but never truly gone. An alpha in a feral state of agony could only be brought down by one thing: the absolute, unwavering submission and comfort of an Omega's scent. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and shattered the last remaining mental barriers holding my scent back. I flooded the cold, sterile room with a concentrated, overwhelming wave of warm vanilla and sweet chamomile. I didn't just release it. I pushed it directly toward him, wrapping the soft, nurturing pheromones around his violent, distressed petrichor like a heavy, protective blanket. Ethan, look at me, I commanded softly, leaning directly into his line of sight, placing my free hand gently against his sweat-drenched cheek. Look at me. You are safe. I am right here. I am not letting you go. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The feral growl hitched in his throat, dissolving into a broken, breathless whine. His dilated pupils focused, locking onto my face. The oppressive storm of his scent immediately softened, the sharp lightning melting into the gentle smell of rain on soft earth. His tense muscles uncoiled, and he leaned his face into my palm, letting out a long, shuddering exhale. "Liam," he breathed, his voice slurring heavily from the drugs and the pain. "I'm here," I whispered, gently stroking his cheekbone with my thumb. "Let Marcus finish. Just look at me." He didn't take his eyes off me for the next 30 minutes. Even as Marcus worked tirelessly, suturing the deep muscle tissue and closing the jagged wound, Ethan remained completely still, anchored entirely by my scent and my touch. The magnetic pull between us, an alpha and an omega stripped down to their most primal instincts in the face of death, was undeniably terrifying, yet beautifully profound. Finally, Marcus tied off the last suture and taped a heavy, sterile combat dressing over the site. "Done," the medic exhaled, pulling off his bloody gloves and tossing them into a biohazard bin. He wiped his brow with the back of his arm, looking at the two of us with a mixture of awe and deep suspicion. "I've seen Omegas calm aggressive alphas before, Liam, but I have never seen a bond hold a feral pureblood down during deep tissue surgery without general anesthesia. What the hell is going on between you two?" "Nothing," I deflected quickly, my cheeks suddenly burning as I pulled my hand away from Ethan's face. Ethan immediately whined softly at the loss of contact, his heavy eyelids fluttering shut as the exhaustion and fentanyl finally pulled him under into a deep, healing sleep. Marcus snorted, grabbing a clean towel and throwing it at me. "Right. Clean yourself up, kid. You look like a horror movie extra." I caught the towel, suddenly hyper-aware of my state. My janitorial uniform was ruined, soaked in freezing sewer water, dirt, and Ethan's blood. I felt a bone-deep chill settle over me as the adrenaline finally left my system. "Marcus," I started, my voice trembling as the reality of the situation crashed down upon me. "They blew up his building. The news says he's dead. If they find out I helped him." "They won't find out from me," Marcus interrupted, his voice gruff but layered with genuine sympathy. He walked over to a metal cabinet and pulled out a clean, oversized gray hoodie and a pair of generic sweatpants. He tossed them onto a chair. "Go to the bathroom in the back. Wash the blood off. Change. Then we need to talk about your next move, because you can't stay here forever." I nodded numbly. I walked into the tiny, grimy bathroom at the back of the clinic, locked the door, and turned on the hot water in the small sink. I stripped off the ruined uniform, scrubbing the grime and dried blood from my skin with harsh industrial soap. As I washed my face, I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. I looked older. The terrified, invisible janitor who had clocked into Sterling Enterprises a few hours ago was gone. In his place was someone who had outrun mercenaries, stitched together a dying billionaire, and fought a genetically mutated monster in a sewer. But beneath it all, I was just Noah's father. Noah. A spike of pure, icy terror drove straight through my heart. I threw the clean clothes on, practically ripping the bathroom door off its hinges as I sprinted back into the main clinic. "Marcus, do you have a secure phone? A burner?" I demanded frantically. Marcus paused, wiping down his surgical tools. "Yeah, in the top drawer of the desk. Fully encrypted." "Why?" I didn't answer. I rushed to the desk, yanked the drawer open, and pulled out a cheap, plastic flip phone. I dialed the number with shaking fingers, pressing the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Pick up, pick up, pick up." "Hello," a sleepy, elderly voice answered. "Mrs. Higgins." I gasped, my knees nearly buckling with relief. "It's Liam." "Liam, dear?" The elderly beta babysitter sounded confused. "It's barely 4 in the morning. Is your shift over early?" "Listen to me very carefully," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm, dropping into a low, serious tone. "Is Noah okay? Is the apartment secure?" "Well, yes, of course," she replied, instantly waking up at my tone. "He's fast asleep. Not a peep all night. What's wrong, Liam? Are you in trouble?" "I need you to wake him up," I ordered, tears prickling the corners of my eyes. "Pack a bag with his clothes, his dinosaur blanket, and his medication. Nothing else. Do not turn on the main lights. I am sending a car for you in exactly 20 minutes. "A car? Liam, you're scaring me." "Mrs. Higgins, please," my voice broke. "My life depends on it. Noah's life depends on it. If anyone knocks on that door before the car arrives, do not open it. Do you understand?" I understand," she whispered, the gravity of the situation finally hitting her. "We will be ready." I hung up the phone, my chest heaving. I turned around to find Marcus watching me, his arms crossed over his chest. "You're calling an extraction for your kid," Marcus stated. It wasn't a question. "Liam, if you send a cab to your apartment, it leaves a paper trail. If Blackwood really is behind this, they own half the grid. They will track the cab. I don't have a choice." I yelled, the panic clawing at my throat. "I dropped my ID badge somewhere in that building. They know a janitor was on that floor. It's only a matter of time before they pull the employee records, find my address, and realize I'm the one who helped him. I cannot leave my son there. He is not taking a cab." The voice was weak, incredibly raspy, but it carried an undeniable weight of authority that silenced the room. I spun around. Ethan was awake. He was propped up slightly on his right elbow, his face contorted in a grimace of pain, but his icy blue eyes were entirely lucid and fiercely focused. He looked at me, a profound, unwavering promise burning in his gaze. "Ethan, you need to lie down." I rushed over to the bed, hovering my hands over his shoulders. "You just had major surgery." "My phone," Ethan demanded, looking at Marcus. "In the pocket of my pants. Did it survive the water?" Marcus walked over to the pile of ruined clothing, retrieving a sleek, titanium-cased smartphone. Miraculously, the screen lit up. He handed it to Ethan. Ethan's fingers flew across the screen, bypassing heavy security encryptions with practiced ease. He held the phone to his ear. "Vance," Ethan rasped into the receiver. "It's me." A pause. Even from a foot away, I could hear the sheer, explosive disbelief on the other end of the line. "I know what the news says," Ethan interrupted coldly. "I'm alive. Listen to me very closely. I need an armored extraction team at a residential address in the Lower East Side. Not our standard detail. Ghost protocol. Only men you trust with your life." Ethan listened for a moment, his eyes never leaving mine. "Target is a 4-year-old boy named Noah and his elderly caretaker. They are to be retrieved with maximum force protection and brought directly to the Safehouse in the Cascades. If anyone interferes, eliminate them. Move now." He hung up, letting the phone drop onto the sterile sheets. He looked up at me, his chest rising and falling heavily with the exertion. "Vance is my head of private security. He is completely off the grid and entirely loyal to me," Ethan explained softly, reaching out to gently grasp my wrist. "He will get your son, Liam. I swore on my blood I would protect him." I meant it. The sheer relief that washed over me was staggering. The invisible weight that had been crushing my lungs finally lifted. I let out a choked sob, falling to my knees beside the surgical bed and pressing my forehead against the mattress. Ethan's large, warm hand slipped from my wrist, moving up to gently cup the back of my head. His fingers threaded through my damp hair, a profoundly intimate, soothing gesture. "Thank you," I cried into the sheets. "Thank you, Ethan. You saved my life twice tonight, Liam," Ethan murmured, his thumb brushing against my ear. "It's the least I can do." Marcus cleared his throat loudly, breaking the intense moment. "Hate to interrupt the bonding, but we have a major problem. You can't stay here. If Blackwood really did blow up a skyscraper to kill you, they are going to turn this city inside out looking for your remains. When they realize there's no body in the ashes, they will hunt you. This clinic is a sitting duck." "I know," Ethan said, his voice hardening into the ruthless CEO once more. He looked down at me. "The drive, Liam. Do you still have it?" I reached into the pocket of my sweatpants and pulled out the matte black flash drive, placing it on the sterile tray. "What exactly is on this thing that is worth leveling a building for?" Marcus asked, eyeing the device like it was a live grenade. "Proof," Ethan spat, a dangerous fire igniting in his eyes. "Blackwood Enterprises operates under the guise of a private security firm, but they are secretly developing illegal, genetically engineered bioweapons. The Bloodhound you saw in the sewer is just the prototype. They are kidnapping unregistered alphas from the streets, mutating them, and selling them to the highest bidder on the black market." I shuddered, the memory of the black-eyed monster flashing in my mind. "I found out about their operations," Ethan continued. "I downloaded their entire encrypted database onto that drive. Schematics, buyer manifests, genetic codes. I was going to hand it over to the Federal Bureau tomorrow morning. Blackwood found out. They staged a corporate coup to silence me and retrieve the data. So what's the play?" Marcus asked grimly. "We move," Ethan declared, forcing himself to sit up further, wincing as his stitches pulled. "Vance is securing my safe house in the mountains. It's a heavily fortified bunker, completely off the grid. Once Noah is safe, we head there. We decrypt the drive, send the files to the authorities, and burn Blackwood to the ground. Ethan looked at me, his icy blue eyes entirely focused, protective, and unmistakably possessive. Are you ready to become a ghost, Liam? End of Part 8. Part 9. Into the Cascades. Are you ready to become a ghost, Liam? The question hung heavily in the sterile, alcohol-scented air of the underground clinic. I looked at Ethan Sterling, the man who hours ago I only knew as a terrifying corporate monolith, the man whose blood was currently permanently stained into my skin. He was asking me to leave everything behind, to step off the edge of the world into complete darkness. But then I thought of the Bloodhound. I thought of the Blackwood mercenaries executing anyone in their path. There was no normal life waiting for me anymore. I'm ready, I said, my voice steadying. But we have to move. Marcus didn't waste a single second. I have an old, beat-up florist delivery van parked in the back alley, he said, moving rapidly around the clinic to gather supplies. It's registered to a dummy corporation that went bankrupt 5 years ago. No GPS, no digital dashboard, completely analog. Nobody looks twice at a load of dead hydrangeas at 5 in the morning. It's perfect, Ethan grunted, shifting his legs over the side of the surgical table. The movement cost him dearly. All the color drained from his face, his jaw locking tight as the freshly sutured muscle tissue stretched. Hold on, tough guy, Marcus warned, walking over with a heavy canvas duffel bag. He pulled out a portable 4-pouch filled with a clear fluid, taping it securely to Ethan's chest beneath the fresh oversized hoodie I had helped him into. That's a cocktail of broad-spectrum antibiotics, heavy fluids, and enough painkillers to drop a horse. It'll keep you on your feet for the drive, but the moment you get to that bunker, you need complete bed rest. If those internal stitches tear again, I won't be there to sew you back together. Understood, Ethan rasped, accepting the keys Marcus tossed to him before handing them directly to me. Marcus looked at me, a rare expression of deep, paternal concern crossing his grizzled features. He pulled me in for a brief, tight hug. Keep your head on a swivel, Liam. Trust no one but him. And if you make it out of this in one piece, bring the kid by someday. I have a pair of boxing gloves with his name on them. Thank you, Marcus, I whispered, fighting the lump in my throat. For everything. We slipped out the heavy steel back door into the freezing, relentless Seattle downpour. True to Marcus's word, a battered, rust-spotted white van sat idling in the shadows, smelling faintly of decaying roses and motor oil. I helped Ethan into the passenger seat. Even with the heavy painkillers masking the worst of his agony, the sheer exhaustion was pulling him under. I slammed his door shut, ran around to the driver's side, and climbed in. The engine sputtered, complaining loudly, before settling into a low, rattling hum. I threw the van into gear and pulled out of the alley, leaving the neon signs of the city's underbelly behind. The drive out of Seattle was a masterclass in psychological torture. Every set of headlights that appeared in the rearview mirror made my heart stop. Every police cruiser parked on the shoulder of the highway was a potential Blackwood operative waiting to finish the job. I kept the van strictly to the speed limit, my hands gripping the thin, cracked steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. As we hit the desolate, winding stretches of Interstate 90, heading east toward the Cascade Mountains, the chaotic neon of the city finally faded into absolute, pitch-black darkness. The heavy rain transitioned into a thick, swirling mountain mist. In the passenger seat, Ethan was incredibly quiet. The portable was doing its job, stabilizing his vitals, but the silence between us was heavy, charged with the unbelievable gravity of the night. You're shaking. Ethan's voice broke the quiet, a low, gravelly rumble over the hum of the heater. I swallowed hard, keeping my eyes glued to the winding mountain road. Just cold. It was a lie. The adrenaline that had sustained me for the past 6 hours was completely gone, leaving me raw, hollowed out, and utterly terrified. I was driving into the wilderness with a man who was supposed to be dead, hunted by a paramilitary corporation, praying that my 4-year-old son was actually safe. Ethan slowly reached across the center console. His large, warm hand covered mine on the gear shift. His touch sent a violent, electric jolt straight up my arm, a biological shockwave that made my breath hitch. He is safe, Liam, Ethan murmured, his thumb drawing slow, soothing circles over my knuckles. He didn't need to ask to know what I was thinking. Vance sent me an encrypted ping 10 minutes ago. The extraction was flawless. Noah and Mrs. Higgins are in the air right now, flying via a radar-cloaked chopper to the Safehouse. They will be waiting for us when we arrive. A choked sob escaped my lips, the sheer relief nearly blinding me. Thank God. No, Ethan corrected softly, his fingers intertwining with mine. Thank you. For not running away when you found me in that washroom. For carrying me through that building. For the x-ray room, the sewer. For giving me your scent when I was losing my mind. I glanced over at him. In the dim green glow of the dashboard lights, Ethan Sterling looked nothing like a ruthless billionaire. He looked vulnerable, deeply awed, and intensely focused on me. The sharp, aggressive edge of his alpha pheromones had entirely vanished, replaced by a warm, protective wave of petrichor that wrapped around my own vanilla scent in a perfect, harmonious balance. Alphas are taught from birth that omegas are fragile, Ethan continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that commanded the entire cabin. That you need to be shielded, hidden away, protected from the harshness of the world. But you, Liam, you are the strongest person I have ever met. You fought a bloodhound to protect me. You shattered every preconceived notion I ever held. My heart hammered a frantic, chaotic rhythm against my ribs. I just did what I had to do to survive. You did more than survive, he said, gently squeezing my hand. You saved me. And I promise you, when this is over, when Blackwood is nothing but ashes, you will never have to scrub another floor or hide in the shadows ever again. You and Noah will want for nothing. That is not a corporate guarantee, Liam. That is an alpha's vow. The sincerity in his icy blue eyes was absolute. He wasn't offering me a reward. He was offering me a sanctuary. He was offering me a place by his side. The biological pull, the deep, undeniable resonance of a true mate bond, was flowering between us in the cold, damp cabin of a stolen florist van. I didn't have the words to answer him, so I just held his hand tighter, letting my scent speak for me, a soft, sweet wave of absolute trust. We drove for another hour, ascending higher into the jagged, towering peaks of the Cascades. The mist turned to a light, powdery snow, dusting the towering pine trees in silver. Following the encrypted GPS coordinates Ethan had typed into his phone, I turned the van off the main highway onto a hidden, unpaved logging road that seemed to lead nowhere. We bumped along the treacherous, rocky path for 3 miles until we reached a sheer, vertical cliff face of solid granite. It was a dead end. We're here, Ethan said, sitting up slightly. He unrolled his window and held his phone out into the freezing air. The screen flashed a complex sequence of strobe lights toward the seemingly solid rock wall. A moment later, a deep, earth-shaking rumble vibrated through the ground. Directly in front of us, a massive 20-foot section of the granite cliff face seamlessly separated, sliding backward on heavy, mechanized tracks to reveal a cavernous, brilliantly lit tunnel plunging deep into the heart of the mountain. Drive in, Ethan instructed. I guided the van into the tunnel. The moment the rear bumper cleared the threshold, the massive stone door ground shut behind us, sealing us inside the earth with a terrifying finality. The tunnel opened up into a sprawling, subterranean bunker that looked like a high-tech military command center. Matte black tactical vehicles were parked in neat rows, heavy weapon caches lined the reinforced concrete walls, and banks of glowing server racks hummed with immense power. Waiting for us in the center of the room was a small army of heavily armed men dressed in unmarked black tactical gear. At the front stood a towering, broad-shouldered alpha with a scarred face and cold, calculating eyes. This had to be Vance. I slammed the van into park, the engine dying with a final, rattling cough. Before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt, I heard it. Daddy! My heart completely stopped. I threw the driver's door open and scrambled out of the van. Running across the polished concrete floor, his little arms outstretched, clutching his frayed green dinosaur blanket, was Noah. Noah! I screamed, dropping to my knees right on the hard floor. He crashed into my chest, knocking the breath out of me. I wrapped my arms around his small, fragile body, burying my face into his soft curls. He smelled like baby shampoo and warm milk. He was unharmed. He was safe. A dam inside me finally broke, and I began to sob uncontrollably, rocking him back and forth. Daddy, you're crying, Noah mumbled into my neck, his little hands patting my back. The big men in the helicopter said you were coming. Are we camping in a cave? Yes, baby. I choked out, laughing and crying at the same time, holding him so tight I was afraid he might vanish. We're camping. You're so brave, my sweet boy. I love you so much. Behind me, the passenger door of the van opened. Ethan stepped out, moving slowly, leaning heavily against the side of the vehicle. His face was drawn with pain, but as he looked at Noah, A profound softness washed over his sharp features. Vance, the scarred security chief, stepped forward, his men instantly saluting the CEO. "Mr. Sterling," Vance said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone. "The perimeter is secured. The air defense systems are online. And the package," he gestured respectfully to Noah, "was retrieved without incident." "Good work, Vance," Ethan said, pulling the encrypted Blackwood drive from his pocket and tossing it to the security chief. "Get this to the decryption team immediately. I want those files extracted and ready to send to the FBI director's personal server by dawn. I want Blackwood dismantled before they even realize I'm still breathing." "Yes, sir," Vance said, catching the drive. But the hardened soldier didn't move. He hesitated, a grim, dark shadow passing over his eyes. Ethan noticed instantly. His alpha posture stiffened, ignoring his injuries. "What is it, Vance?" Vance looked at me, then at Noah, and finally back to his boss. "Sir, the Blackwood drive is heavily encrypted, but it's not the only thing emitting a signal." "What are you talking about?" Ethan demanded, his voice dropping dangerously low. "The drive's beacon was killed in the lead room at the clinic. I checked it myself." "Not the drive, sir," Vance said, his face entirely grim. "We ran a full biometric sweep on the extraction chopper, just to be safe. We found a micro-tracker." The blood in my veins turned to ice. "Where?" Ethan snarled. "Woven into the lining of the boy's dinosaur blanket," Vance revealed. "Blackwood didn't just hack the city grid, sir. They hacked the municipal childcare registry. They knew about the boy before they even blew up your office. They planted the tracker at his daycare yesterday afternoon. Silence descended upon the bunker, deafening and absolute. I looked down at the frayed green blanket in my son's hands, horror rising in my throat like bile. They hadn't just been hunting Ethan. They had set a trap for me from the very beginning. "Sir," Vance continued, his voice tight with imminent danger. "The tracker pinged our location exactly 4 minutes ago before we scrambled the signal. They know where the bunker is." A loud, piercing alarm suddenly shattered the quiet of the subterranean base. Blinking red lights flooded the concrete walls. "Sensors are picking up heavy aerial movement," one of the technicians yelled from the server banks. "Multiple unmarked gunships approaching the mountain. ETA is 5 minutes. Ethan slowly turned his head, his icy blue eyes locking onto the massive, reinforced steel doors of the tunnel. "Arm the men," Ethan ordered, his voice echoing with the terrifying, absolute authority of an apex predator preparing for war. "Nobody touches my family." End of Part 9. Part 10. The storm breaks. The subterranean bunker erupted into a symphony of calculated, terrifying violence. The blaring red strobe lights washed over the concrete walls, casting long, nightmarish shadows as Vance's tactical team mobilized with flawless military precision. The heavy clack of assault rifles chambering rounds and the mechanical hum of automated sentry turrets deploying from the ceiling drowned out the frantic beating of my own heart. "Daddy, it's loud," Noah cried out, burying his face into my neck, his little hands gripping the collar of my oversized hoodie with terrifying strength. "I know, baby, I know. I've got you. Close your eyes," I whispered fiercely, wrapping my arms completely around him, turning my body into a physical shield. Ethan stood in the center of the command floor, completely ignoring the portable taped to his chest and the horrific tear in his abdominal muscles. The pureblood Alpha CEO was gone, replaced entirely by a ruthless warlord defending his territory. His icy blue eyes snapped to his head of security. "Vance, status on the decryption." Ethan roared over the sirens. 85%, sir," a technician yelled from the glowing server banks, his fingers flying across a holographic keyboard. "The Blackwood encryption is heavily layered. I need exactly 3 more minutes to crack the final firewall and transmit the data to the federal servers." "You have 2, Ethan ordered coldly. He turned back to Vance. "Deploy the heavy ordnance at the tunnel entrance. Nothing breaches this mountain. And get them to the inner vault. Now." Vance nodded sharply, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward a massive circular steel door at the back of the bunker that looked like a bank vault. "Move, Liam. Get the boy inside." "No, Ethan," I screamed, digging my heels into the concrete. The thought of leaving him out here, bleeding and exhausted, while a paramilitary force descended upon us, triggered a violent rebellion in my Omega instincts. My scent spiked, sharp, distressed vanilla and chamomile, pleading with him to seek shelter with us. Ethan turned to me. Despite the chaos, despite the impending war, his expression softened entirely. He limped across the floor, closing the distance between us. He cupped the back of my neck with his large, warm hand, pressing his forehead firmly against mine. His scent, the heavy, protective aroma of a thunderstorm, wrapped around me like a suit of armor. "Listen to me," he commanded, his voice a low, vibrating rumble meant only for us. "You are my heart walking outside of my body right now. If you are out here, I will be terrified, and a terrified alpha makes mistakes. Get in the vault. Keep our pup safe. I will handle the monsters. Our pup." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just protecting a stranger's child. He had claimed us. Tears blurred my vision, but I nodded. "Do not die, Ethan Sterling. You promised." "I am a man of my word," he breathed, pressing a fierce, searing kiss to my forehead. Vance shoved me and Noah through the heavy steel threshold of the vault. The massive door ground shut, locking with a series of deafening, echoing clunks, sealing us in absolute, impenetrable silence. The inner vault was a small, well-lit panic room lined with lead and reinforced titanium. A bank of security monitors on the wall displayed the live feeds of the bunker outside. I set Noah down on a plush cot in the corner, wrapping his green dinosaur blanket tightly around him. "Stay right here, Noah. Do not move," I instructed, my voice trembling but firm. I turned to the monitors just as the mountain above us violently shook. A massive explosion rocked the camera feeds. Static hissed across the screens as the 20-foot granite doors at the tunnel entrance were blown completely inward. Dust and debris flooded the corridor. Through the smoke, they emerged. Dozens of Blackwood operatives, clad in heavy matte black tactical armor, pouring into the tunnel like a swarm of mechanical locusts. Vance's men opened fire. The bunker became a slaughterhouse of tracer rounds, tactical explosives, and laser sights. Automated turrets rained heavy-caliber rounds down upon the invaders, chewing through the Blackwood ranks, but they just kept coming. On the central monitor, I watched Ethan. He had taken cover behind a reinforced concrete pillar near the server banks, a heavy assault rifle in his hands. Every time he leaned out to fire, his face contorted in sheer agony, his stitched wound undoubtedly tearing further, but his aim was devastatingly precise. He was fighting like a demon, holding the line to protect the technicians behind him. 95%, the lead technician screamed over the comms, the audio feeding into the vault. Suddenly, a massive, heavily armored Blackwood transport breached the tunnel, its mounted heavy machine gun tearing through the bunker's defenses. The transport didn't stop to fight. It rammed directly through the barricades, barreling straight toward the server banks. "They're going for the servers. Fall back," Vance roared. Ethan didn't fall back. He dropped his empty rifle, his eyes locking onto the transport. He knew if they destroyed the servers, the drive would be lost, the transmission would fail, and Blackwood would win. With a feral, echoing roar, Ethan stepped completely out of cover. He reached to his tactical belt, pulled the pin on a heavy-duty plasma grenade, and threw it with terrifying, pinpoint accuracy directly under the front axle of the speeding transport. The explosion was blinding. The camera feeds whited out for 3 agonizing seconds. When the picture returned, the transport was a burning husk, flipped onto its side. But the shockwave had thrown Ethan backward. He lay motionless on the concrete floor, dangerously close to the vault door. "Ethan!" I screamed, slamming my hands against the unyielding titanium of the vault. "Transmission complete," the technician yelled triumphantly. "The files are in the federal mainframe. It's done." But the victory was short-lived. From the burning wreckage of the transport, a figure emerged. He wasn't wearing a tactical helmet. He was dressed in a pristine, dark suit, completely out of place in the war zone. He was holding a heavy, silver hand cannon, and he was walking straight toward Ethan's unconscious body. It was Silas Thorne, the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, an alpha known for his absolute, sociopathic cruelty. "Open the door," I breathed, panic completely overriding my logic. I looked at the manual override panel on the wall. If I opened the door, I would be exposing myself and Noah to a war zone. But if I didn't, Ethan was going to be executed on live video. I will not let my family die. "Noah, hide under the cot and cover your ears," I commanded. I smashed my fist into the emergency release button. The titanium vault door hissed, sliding open. The deafening roar of the firefight flooded in. I grabbed a heavy steel fire axe from the emergency panel on the wall and stepped out of the vault just as Thorne stood over Ethan, raising his hand cannon to the back of Ethan's head. A valiant effort, Sterling, Thorn sneered, his voice dripping with venom. But in the end, the bigger monster always wins. Get away from him. I screamed, releasing a concentrated, biological wave of pure, unfiltered Omega distress. Thorn snapped his head toward me. The sudden influx of my pheromones momentarily disoriented him, a biological glitch in his sociopathic programming. He looked at me, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. Ah, the little janitor who caused all this trouble. I'm going to enjoy mounting your head on my wall. He swung the gun toward me. But my scent hadn't just distracted Thorn. It had acted like a defibrillator to Ethan's primal instincts. The scent of his distressed, cornered Omega flooded Ethan's senses, completely overriding his physical trauma. Ethan's eyes snapped open, blazing with an otherworldly, terrifying blue light. With a guttural, terrifying roar, Ethan swept his leg out, catching Thorn behind the knees. Thorn fired wildly into the ceiling as he collapsed. Before he could recover, Ethan was on top of him. The billionaire didn't use a weapon. He used his bare hands. Ethan's fist collided with Thorn's jaw with a sickening, bone-shattering crack. Once, twice, 3 times, until the Blackwood CEO lay completely unconscious on the blood-stained concrete. Silence suddenly fell over the bunker. The remaining Blackwood operatives, seeing their leader beaten to a pulp and realizing their encrypted comms were screaming about incoming federal airstrikes, dropped their weapons. They surrendered to Vance's heavily bruised and bleeding men. It was over. We had won. Ethan slowly stood up, swaying dangerously on his feet. He turned to look at me, his chest heaving, his face covered in soot and blood. The blue fire in his eyes slowly faded back to his intelligent, icy blue. He took one step toward me, and then his legs completely gave out. Ethan! I dropped the axe, sprinting across the floor and catching him just before he hit the concrete. We collapsed together, my arms wrapping tightly around his massive frame. Did it send? He rasped, his head falling heavily against my shoulder. Yes, I sobbed, burying my face into his neck, inhaling the exhausted, gentle scent of rain that was rapidly fading. It sent. They're coming. You did it, Ethan. No, he whispered, his eyes fluttering shut, a soft, genuine smile gracing his lips for the first time since I met him. We did it. 3 months later. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the sprawling, mountaintop estate, casting a warm, golden glow across the master bedroom. The air smelled perfectly of rich pine, fresh coffee, and the unmistakable, deeply comforting blend of warm vanilla and sweet petrichor. I stood by the glass, holding a steaming mug, looking out over the pristine beauty of the Cascades. Behind me, the bed sheets rustled. 2 strong, heavily scarred arms wrapped around my waist from behind, pulling my back flush against a broad, warm chest. Ethan buried his face in the crook of my neck, right over the fresh, healing mating bite that marked me as his bondmate. He inhaled deeply, a low, contented rumble vibrating in his chest. You're up early, Ethan murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I couldn't sleep, I smiled, leaning back into his embrace. I was thinking about how much has changed. It had been a chaotic 90 days. The federal government had raided Blackwood Enterprises, dismantling their illegal bioweapons division and arresting their entire executive board. Sterling Enterprises had completely rebuilt the 50th floor, and Ethan had restructured his life. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations, preferring to run his empire from the safety and peace of our mountain home. I was no longer a ghost. I was Liam Sterling. Change is good, Ethan whispered, gently turning me around to face him. He looked healthier, his sharp features softened by peace, his icy eyes filled with an overwhelming, unconditional love. He pressed a soft kiss to my lips. Suddenly, the bedroom door burst open. Daddy! Papa! Noah rushed into the room, fully dressed in his superhero pajamas, carrying a heavily guarded, top-secret piece of tactical equipment, a plush green dinosaur. Marcus is downstairs. He brought the boxing gloves. Ethan laughed, a rich, booming sound that completely filled the room. He scooped Noah up into his arms, tossing the giggling boy into the air before catching him effortlessly. Well, we can't keep Marcus waiting, can we, pup? Ethan grinned, looking over at me. I watched the two of them, the most powerful alpha in the world and my beautiful, brave little boy. My heart swelled with a happiness so profound it physically ached. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't running. I was exactly where I belonged. No, I smiled, walking over and wrapping my arms around my family. Let's go. End of story, series finale. Wow. Just wow. Take a deep breath with me, everyone, because that was an absolute roller coaster. Welcome back to the real world, and thank you for tuning in to your BL boyfriend. If your heart is still pounding in your chest like mine is, you are definitely not alone. Let's just take a moment to unpack everything we just experienced in this story. Because honestly, this gave us everything we could ever want in an Omegaverse thriller. First of all, can we talk about Liam? We see so many stories where the Omega is just fragile and waiting to be rescued, but not our Liam. He started as this terrified, invisible janitor just trying to survive the night shift for his son, Noah. But the moment danger hit, his protective instincts completely overrode his fear. I mean, he dragged a bleeding alpha billionaire across a building, stitched him up on a cold metal table in the dark, and literally took a heavy steel wrench to a genetically mutated monster in a sewer. Liam proved that being an Omega doesn't mean you're weak. It means your strength is fueled by pure, unyielding love. He is the true definition of a survivor. And then there is Ethan Sterling, the untouchable, icy alpha CEO. What I loved most about Ethan's character arc was how he completely shattered the toxic, arrogant alpha stereotype. Yes, he was lethal. Yes, he threw a plasma grenade to save his family. But his most powerful moments weren't his displays of physical strength. They were his moments of absolute vulnerability. When he let his feral instincts be calmed by Liam's scent, when he made that blood oath in the dark, and when he surrendered his pride because he realized Liam was the one holding them both together. Ethan didn't just find a mate, he found his humanity. The dynamic between them was simply electric. From the claustrophobic, intense tension in that supply closet to the sheer terror of the underground tunnels, their bond was forged in absolute fire. And seeing them finally get their peaceful, domestic morning in the Cascades with little Noah running in with his dinosaur, that was the ultimate payoff. But now, I want to hear from you. This channel is a conversation, and I love reading your thoughts. Let me ask you a few questions. Drop your answers down in the comments below. Question 1. What was the most intense scene for you? Was it the moment the Blackwood mercenaries breached the executive floor, or was it that terrifying encounter with the Bloodhound in the storm drains? Question 2. If you were in Liam's shoes, working the graveyard shift, and you found a dying billionaire in the washroom, honestly, what would you have done? Would you have run for the exit, or would you have risked everything to help? And question 3. What did you think of Silas Thorne getting completely knocked out by Ethan's bare hands? So satisfying, right? If you loved this story as much as I did, please do me a huge favor and smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me what kind of stories you want to hear next. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload from your BL boyfriend. We have so many more thrilling, passionate, and heartwarming boy love stories coming your way, and you definitely want a front row seat. Thank you all so much for listening, for commenting, and for being the absolute best community on YouTube. I appreciate every single one of you for staying until the very end. Stay safe, stay romantic, and I will see you in the next story. Bye for now.